Welcome to Beyond the Powerline Road. With us today, we had Rudy Wray from Sunset School of Preaching. Rudy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, brother. How about you?
I am doing very well. Thank you so very much. Hey, can you tell us some about your vocation, what you do with the School of Preaching?
Well, primarily, I work or have worked in Latin America. I do serve, I did serve with Sunset as the Dean of International Development for about 10 years, but I have worked in Latin America most of my ministry life, which began in 1971 when we went to Central America as missionaries there.
Well, and so you were actually on ground with the serving or with the missionary work.
Yes, we were there for 9 years in Central America.
Well, now, most of your missionary work now is remote. Is that correct?
That is correct. I teach online through Zoom in about four different Spanish-speaking schools, preacher training schools in Mexico and around different areas of Latin America.
Now, where are you located now? I was thinking it was Portland. Am I wrong?
Yes, we just sold our home in Portland, and we are trying to decide where we're going to settle next. Right now, we are in Yuma, Arizona,
Oh,
close to some of the schools in Mexico.
okay. So, at one time, and you said four different countries, at one time, you were involved in evangelizing Cuba. And I'm guessing that you've established churches there, but there are obstacles now with getting in there. Is that correct?
Not exactly. The word evangelizing is not correct in Cuba.
Okay.
You're not allowed to evangelize in Cuba.
Oh,
I'm going to try to make this as short as I can, but in 1998, Klein Payton, who was the director of Sunset at that time, asked my wife and I to go to Miami, Florida, and establish a preacher training school there in Spanish because there were 54 different languages, Spanish language countries represented in Miami, Florida, but with a specific assignment of trying to get into Cuba with preacher training. And so we went to Miami in 1998, moved there, and were able, by God's grace, to establish a preacher training school there. We started in 2000 with 14 students, but we had no idea what we could do in Cuba. In the meantime, unbeknown to us, in Cuba, since 1985, when Russia withdrew all its support from Cuba, they have, of course, been in very difficult straits, not enough anything. And we found out, a couple of churches in the South found out that Cuba needed medical equipment, medicines, and different kinds of things like that. And so they loaded up a couple of container ships with all kinds of medical equipment and medicines, so much so that it got the attention of the Cuban government. And believe it or not, the Cuban government has a ministry of religion.
oh,
And they do allow certain religions to operate in Cuba. They believe that they have complete religious freedom. That isn't really correct, completely correct, but the Ministry of Religion, then seeing all the work that Churches of Christ have done for their country, contacted the church in Havana. We did not know it at the time, but there is not only a church in Havana, but churches of Christ throughout most of Cuba. In fact, there were probably 4,000 members of the church there,
Wow.
and over 100 preachers in Cuba at that time. But none of those preachers had any formal ministry training. So the lady who was in charge of the religious efforts in Cuba contacted the Churches of Christ and said, "You've done so much for us. What can we do for you?" And some of the preachers there said, "Well, here our problem is we've got all kinds of preachers here, but no formal training. But there is a school in Miami, Florida called Atlantic International Bible Institute that would be willing to come and train some of our men with your permission." And she said, "We think that might be able to be arranged." And so they did their arrangements necessary. They allowed one of the preachers to come to Miami to visit with us and invite us to come and do not evangelistic work. We couldn't even use the word institute, but to teach seminars to our preachers that needed training. And so they invited us to come. When they invited us to come, I said, "Well, that's nice. We'll come. We'd love to come, but it's illegal from the United States point of view to come." And he said, "Well, no, that's not necessarily true." He said, "If you'll check with the Treasury Department, if there is an existing work in Cuba, you can get special permission to go and teach in the churches, not evangelize, but teach in the churches." Well, I thought, this is wonderful. So I got the address and I sent a letter to the ministry, Treasury, and which happened to be located in Miami. And I got, I thought, this will be pretty easy. And then the day after I sent the letter, 9/11 happened. And I thought, we'll never hear from them. And surprisingly enough, within a week, I got a letter from the Treasury Ministry saying, "Yes, we will grant you a 2-year permission to go to Cuba, renewal every 2 years upon our supervision of what is being done down there." So we started in 2001, going to Cuba, Havana, Cuba, teaching seminars to the preachers in Cuba, in Havana, Cuba. We started doing just 3 months every quarter, and they wouldn't let us use the word institute in any way, Bible Institute, but seminar. And so we did these seminars for a couple of years, 3 years. But the ministry of Cuba was watching what we were doing, sending spies always to make sure what we were doing. And after the end of 3 years, they gave us permission to open up a real Bible Institute, formal Bible Institute, and offer even bachelor's degrees. And that is, we did that. We started out doing that. The bachelor's program lasted through about 4 years, 6 years actually. And then we added a master's program, and we're now thinking about adding a doctorate program there in Cuba. All of it has been under the auspices and approval of the Cuban government, and we have been very, very careful not to do anything that would cause any suspicion in Cuba. And God has blessed it. This is just God's work. He opened it up completely. And so I've been going back to Cuba now for I've been there about 20 times.
Wow.
Up until this last 2 years after the COVID thing, I have not gone since then. Partly is because of my age. I'm 85 years old now, and I need to kind of slow down just a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's as briefly as I can tell you the story of Cuba.
That is amazing, and that is encouraging. It's refreshing. I'm glad to hear that. That is a great story, and it's a good one that should encourage a lot of people that want to get into evangelism, which I think brings me probably to one of the last questions. What advice do you have for individuals that want to be evangelists or preachers or, institute teachers or what have you?
Well, the only advice I really would have is if a person wants to become a full-time minister, they need to go into some kind of full-time training. Now, God doesn't demand that. The Bible doesn't demand that. But if you want to be really effective, you need to get some formal training. And I would suggest that you go to, depending on your situation, a preacher training school. Maybe go to a preacher training school for 2 years, because all of their classes are accepted by other Christian universities, and they're all free. So you can get 2 years of Bible training for free, and then you can finish it out in a Christian college and get your bachelor's degree with very little expense and only about 2 more years' time. So I would suggest always that you get some kind of formal training. I would like to say quickly, though, that right now, opening up through these Zoom classes, you can teach classes in English anywhere almost in the world and evangelize that way, or do ministry training that way. There are several programs: World English School out of Portland, Oregon, World Bible School out of Austin, Texas, Worldwide Spanish Literature in Wichita Falls, Texas. All these are helps for Hispanic ministry training, and anyone can do it. You can speak English. You can teach people through Zoom one way or another.
That is impressive, and thank you for the that information. I did not know that the classes transferred from a preaching school to a bachelor's degree. That is nice to know.
They transfer, but only in a Christian college.
I understand that. Yeah, that makes some sense. Well, Rudy, I am very grateful, and I want to thank you again for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Well, thank you very much, brother, and good